Good day, all, and welcome to Chronically PWS. Today's really special, and these next couple of videos are going to be very special because it's going to actually be me talking about my life with prader-willi syndrome and kind of interviewing my mom, Linda Rogers, about my illness and her experiences with it and how she kind of overcame some of the challenges and adapted to some of the challenges and things like that growing up. I know this will be really intriguing for a lot of parents out there with newly diagnosed kids, maybe treading on some familiar waters for those who have adults with prader-willi syndrome. But I thought it would be really beneficial and helpful, and would help highlight and talk about prader-willi syndrome in the day and age that I grew up in the late 70s, 80s, and 90s. So we're going to kind of start this first video with my birth. I'm going to ask Mom some questions, and we're going to talk and discuss those questions, and just kind of go from my birth to age 5. So that's going to be this first video that we're making here. And well, Mom, tell me about the day, that Monday, that you went into labor. Tell me a little bit about it.
Well, we joked about it a little bit because I kept telling my mother, that right before Labor Day, maybe I'd go into labor on Labor Day, and I did exactly that.
Yeah.
So I started labor about 3 in the afternoon, and I really didn't have contractions. My water broke somewhat, and then they started later, and I ended up, I called your father, and my mother came to check on me and decided to stay with me and go to the hospital with me. And so we went to the hospital about 7:30 or 8 o'clock, somewhere around there, and I was having contractions at that time. And so when I get to the hospital, you have to wait so long. I had an epidural, and you have to wait so long for them to be able to start it, like it had to be dilated so far. Well, and they hook you up to monitors. They did back in the late 70s, where you can hear the heartbeat, and I could hear the heartbeat. And so they kept making me lay on my left side.
Okay.
Well, this is my first child, and I didn't know what to expect during all this, and I didn't know that it was unusual for me to have to lay on my left side. But I was laying there very intently listening to your heartbeat, and it occurred to me that every time I had a contraction, your heartbeat would get really slow. So eventually I asked the nurse why, and she said, just stay on your side. She didn't really give me an answer to that, why the heartbeat was slowing down. And later on I found out that the cord was wrapped around your neck, and so every time I would have a contraction, it would tighten around your neck, and that would cause your heartbeat to slow down. So they didn't want to tell me that, of course, when I was in labor, to do something or say something that would probably upset me. But for 8 hours, I lay there on my left side.
Wow.
So about 6 in the morning, somewhere around 6 in the morning, I was ready to deliver.
So who was in the delivery room with you? Was it, and were you in a delivery room, or was it just in the hospital room?
No, they took you to a delivery room then. I don't know how they do it now. And they only allowed your husband back then in the 78.
Yeah.
They only allowed the husband to stay in the room. They were real picky about who was in the room with the baby and who was in the room with the mother. So your dad was in there, And I remember when you're pregnant or when you're in labor, your emotions change a little bit because of all those excess hormones that are happening in your body at that time. And I remember that your dad rolled his chair accidentally over my IV line.
Mm-hmm.
And I started moving my hand and it pulled. And you get, sometimes, and a lot of women do this, they get a little bit mean when they get in labor. And I fussed at him because he rolled over. I told him, get off my IV line, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you were born, they had to go, they didn't want me to push.
Okay.
When you were ready to be born.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I had pushed, it would have tightened that cord tighter around your neck. And so they went up in there with forceps and pulled you out because they did not want me pushing.
Gotcha.
So I pushed maybe twice out of the whole time. The very last minute, they asked me to push a couple of times. And so when they got you out, they took you over and laid you on there was like this, back then, it was a table with this huge light over it. And they laid, with blankets and stuff, they laid you there. And I noticed they were there for a long time. And I noticed that the nurse called the doctor over to that table. And he was saying, "Where's the boy?" You know, and all that. But I knew something had not gone right. When that happened, and then they used to have a score 1 through 10 when a baby was born. That they graded the babies. And so it had to do with your skin color and how, basically what it was a quick health assessment of the baby.
Gotcha.
And they were looking at stuff like the color of the skin, was it right, and alertness and all this other stuff. And you were blue a little bit. You were also born with jaundice.
Right, jaundice. Yeah.
So that back then, you had a pretty bad case of jaundice. So they had to immediately put you under what they called the bilirubin light. And so we had to stay in the hospital because I was breastfeeding. I had to stay in the hospital. You had to stay in the hospital because you had other physical problems as well. And so they put this huge mask on you, and you only weighed like 5 pounds, very low birth rate weight. And so they did that, and they kept you under the light, and they had goggles on you. And then they told me about some of your physical problems. We didn't know all of them at that time because we gradually learned about your prader-willi and the rest of it.
So you just mentioned about that score that they gave the baby. Do you remember what my score was objectively, or was it?
It was like, I think 10 would have been perfect, and I think you got a 7 or 8, something like that. It was written somewhere, probably in your medical records, if you got any.
I don't think I have any from my birth, but that's interesting. I didn't know that. So I know you talked about, and we talked about this at some point about after my birth, before you kind of saw me regularly, like towards the end of the jaundice treatment, right? You had said that you're really angry about things, and do you remember why you were angry or who you were angry at that point?
The reason I feel like I was angry was in the recovery room, the doctor came, and I was by myself at that point. My mother and your dad had gone to get some breakfast, and the doctor comes into recovery room, and I've had an epidural. I'm not quite, I just got out of so many hours of labor, and I was real excited because I had a baby, and all that was going on. So it was a very emotional time. And I think the doctor, he was very young at that point. I feel like he could have been gentler about what he said to me and the way he said it, but he was very young. I think this was his first year of practice. And he ended up years later being one of the best, a better part of some of my life.
Yeah.
But at that point, he was very young, and he was an obstetrician at that point. He changed to different specialties after that. So he came to the recovery room and he said, Miss Payne, I'm going to ask you not to name your baby today. And I looked at him and I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, we've got a call in, but he said, we're not sure about his gender yet.
Okay.
And so I said, not sure? What are you talking about? Now, you got to remember, I'm 24 years old. I was so sheltered all my life.
Mm-hmm.
I was alone.
Right.
And I felt like he could have been gentler and explained it to me, but I can't blame him, because he was a new doctor and all that. I was angry with him, though, for a while. He should have waited. He should have never done that without my husband there and my mother for moral support and all that. So the way my personality type is controlled, like type A, I guess most people would call it, I could not fall apart. And
so you were mad.
So what I did was I got very angry to keep from,
losing control,
to control the situation, which seemed so uncontrollable to me. It was like anger was my defense in a way. So I did get very angry that day. And because I didn't want pity, I got angry and I was very aggressive that day. I know that I was, and I don't know that I had ever reacted to any situation like that in my life before then. So I did get angry, and I got so angry and was rude with people that were trying to because it was something so unusual to happen. They didn't know how to handle it, the nurses and all that. So I had all these different reactions, and they couldn't understand the reaction because who would?
Right.
So I was so upset, and I was in the recovery room, and I told them, get me out of that recovery room now and take me to my room. I demanded everything.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I said, you get me out of here now and take me to my room. And so they did, and Mom and your dad were not there, and I was laying there, and people began to call and, hey, be real happy, and what did you have? And because that's the first question people are going to ask, because back then they didn't have the test. You didn't know what
the blood test.
How was I supposed to answer them? That was a trigger question at that point for me.
Yeah.
And so what I did was, I thought, you're going to do what I say to do. I'm the one going through all this.
Right.
So that was the anger picking.
Yeah.
And so I called the nurse and I said, I want a private room. Well, we don't have any. I said, well, you better make me one. And so I was so bad, and then I got mad, even madder, and she left the room. I was in the room with another woman. That way, if I got a private room, I didn't have to answer my phone and deal with people's questions. Also, I wanted to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to be in a room with a stranger going through what I was going through. And so I got mad, and your dad wasn't there, mom wasn't there. I had all this anger inside of me.
Mm-hmm.
And so beside of me on the nightstand was a water pitcher, and they brought a maternity kit in for the mothers, which they do, and the phone book and the phone and all this stuff was around me. And I just was so angry that I picked them up one at a time and threw them against the wall.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't, it's hard to explain, but that was, if I didn't have my anger, I don't know what I would have done, type deal.
Yeah.
And to me, it was better to be angry than crying. I don't know if anybody can understand it. Maybe somebody that's
I'm sure.
had a child with
Yeah.
problems, can understand that. It wasn't intended toward anybody.
Yeah.
It was, I was about to explode.
It was the way that you tried to take control.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that. And I think, anybody out there,
And I'm going to
medicine's changed so much anymore that anybody out there now hearing what they heard about that and the way the doctors responded would probably agree that you had the most appropriate response that you could have at the time.
Well, with the other thing, and I don't know, this is hard for me because I don't know how much I told you because I tried to hide some things from you because it is such a delicate subject. And so the next thing was, and then my doctor left, and there was a female doctor that took its place on call at the hospital. She was a big, tall woman, like 6'2", and very, just a really huge woman.
Yeah.
And so her name was Dr. Wilson, and she was in the hospital at the time, right after you were born, when I was by myself. And so the nurse comes in, and I'm by myself and still, and she says, "We're going to bring the baby in." I said, "No, you're not." And she looked at me so strangely, and I said, "I don't want the baby in here right now." And she said, "Why not?" And I said, "I just said I don't want it in here right now." Because I had to gain composure. I had to think, everything was rushing at me.
Yeah.
And I couldn't take another emotion just yet.
Yeah.
So what they assumed was I don't know what the word is, starts with a D. In other words, I didn't want you because you weren't perfect or something, that I was pushing you away. That was not it.
Right.
So they called the doctor. They did a call for that doctor that was in the hospital for her to call them. And evidently they explained to her what was going on with me and asked her, could she come up and talk to me, and she prescribed a shot to calm me down because I was being, I was angry and I was causing the woman in the room beside of me. I'm sitting there throwing stuff at the wall.
Yeah.
And to be honest, she had a healthy baby and I didn't. I was mad about things.
Yeah.
And so she came, the doctor came, and asked me, why do you not want them to bring the baby in here?
Yeah.
I looked at her, I said, well, tell me what the baby is.
Yeah.
And she said, well, it doesn't matter what the baby is. It's your baby. I said, I know that it's my baby. I'm not stupid. But what's the first thing when you see a human being coming towards you? What's the first thing you think about? I said, tell me. And she said, well, you need to do that because you need to bond with your baby, and I had ordered you a shot to help you to feel better. But what it was to calm me down, I'm sure.
Right.
So, being the peacemaker that my mother always has been, and the reasonable voice, my mom was sitting there, and I didn't think about the effect of Mama watching all this happening in front of her, how it's been affecting my mother.
Mm-hmm.
So she looked at me and she said, "How about this? If I stay in the room with you, if they'll let me stay in the room with you, will you let them bring the baby in? Because I'd like to see the baby." She knew that that would turn a page for me once they brought you in there. So I think that's why she said that if they'll let me, and the nurse said, "Oh, we'll give you some surgical clothes and let you stay in here. If you'll let us bring the baby, your mom can stay here with you." So I said, "Well, okay." So that was that story, and then of course they brought the baby in and brought you in, and I never will forget it. I held my hands out like this.
Mm-hmm.
And they put your head in one hand and your butt in the other, and I'm standing there like that looking at you. I just wanted to look at you. And I doubt they've ever handed a baby to a mother like that before, but I held my hands out like that.
Mm-hmm.
I knew how I wanted to hold you, and my mother was looking. And my mother hadn't shown any upset or emotion. She was trying so hard, and they brought you in and set you, and you were so beautiful because you had a lot of black hair, and you looked like you'd been to the beach for a week because you had jaundice so bad it looked like you had a really good tan.
Right.
So I looked at you, and I looked up at Mother, and I said, "Mama, I think that this is a boy."
Uh-huh.
And she busted into tears, and she said, "I do too."
Uh-huh.
And I remember that so well, and that she just busted into tears. And so that was sort of a breaking point for me. So then they took you back, called them to take you back, and then in 10 minutes I called them back, said, "Bring him in here again."
Mm-hmm.
And I fell in love that minute
Mm-hmm.
that they set you in my hands. All that anger it helped subside that. But the shot didn't even faze me.
Yeah.
So,
Gotcha. Might have taken a little bit of edge off, but it didn't really change the way you felt, like they thought it would, right?
yeah.
I know you had said about the score when I was born and how they objectively looked at things and gave me a 7. Were there any milestones for an infant that weren't really hit before I left the hospital? Did they say anything about like the failure to thrive or anything like that? I guess that wasn't really adjudicated or decided on at that point.
No, they said nothing because all of your physical act that they knew of, they were the big issue was the urologist came that day, and that you were diagnosed tentatively,
Right.
and they had to send your smear off to California,
Okay.
blood work, to make sure that his diagnosis corresponded with everything else. And so they were I had an appointment to come back, and you had to have the blood work done in a week after you left. They had to draw blood, which was absolutely hard as a mother to lay your little week-old child down there and let them draw blood out of your teeny tiny little arm. But that was the only thing they spoke of to me in any relation. And then, of course, we were going to continue with the urologist.
Gotcha. So it was just like a follow-up
Yeah,
from the urology.
It was
take care of the hypospadias or see what we need to do at that point.
Right, and hypospadias was then you were first, second, third, or fourth degree, like a burn.
Yeah.
And you were fourth degree, which would have been the worst. So you were severely affected.
Mhm. When did you notice, as far as me having the hypotonia, where I couldn't, I didn't have any musculature to hold my head up and all that? When did you tell the doctor and then really address that as a concern, as far as that, and then also the feeding problems that I had initially?
Well, the head, I knew, they had explained to me that, and at some point, I believe probably the pediatrician, once
Mm-hmm.
they came and examined you, because the cord was wrapped around your neck, their diagnosis was that caused problems because you also laid in one position in my wound and didn't hardly move out of that position. And it was odd because when I would walk forward, my belly looked like it was going to the side.
Gotcha.
Because you were laying all on one side, and they assumed that, along with the cord being wrapped around your neck, that you had laid in the same position and your head was slightly tilted to one side in the wound when you were doing that, which caused your neck muscle not to develop on that side of your neck. And it hurt you because that muscle was short, so you held your head to the side. They explained that to me and gave me some exercises to stretch that neck muscle and told me you would be okay in time, just keep pushing your head. And you did not like that.
Gotcha.
As a baby, so you would start to cry,
But as far as like sitting up and those other things, grasping and pulling, when did they notice that was a problem overall?
Well, what happened was because there again, I had never been around babies, did not know, because I was almost like an only child because I was a late in life baby. Your Aunt Shirley's mother-in-law, who worked for the Developmental Evaluation Center in Asheville, and that's what she dealt in. She was an LPN or RN. She knew all about that. Well, she came to the house to see you, and I noticed when she was there, she was looking you over, like, and sort of feeling your skin and doing some things. And I think what she needed to do after she realized that there was a problem during that visit, which I didn't realize, this is my take on what probably happened. As soon as they left my house, she didn't want to discuss it with me until she asked her daughter-in-law, Shirley, there's something wrong with the baby and she needs to know it. And is it okay if I call her and talk to her about it and explain things? And of course, Shirley obviously gave her permission to do that. And once she got home, she called me and told me that she felt like there was something wrong with you. And she explained to me the few things that she realized when she was there. And one of them, and I found this really interesting, that's the little things that probably some others out there now don't even know this. But there's a way that a baby holds their hand that's normal. And that is with your thumb inside your fist. That's normal. Yours was like this. That was a giveaway to her. She put a rattle in your hand, and it was like, even if you can't put it in the other hand, you're supposed to sort of be trying to. There was, and then she patted you on the head, certain things to see your reaction, if you reacted to being patted on the head. She did, she explained that she did some of those things, and that you needed to be evaluated, that you were what she termed developmentally delayed. You weren't doing the things you were supposed to, and that you needed to be tested. And she said, if you'll allow me, I will make an appointment for you and call you with the appointment time to come over there. But I think probably what they need to do is call your pediatrician to get a referral to them too. So that's how I discovered that there was a problem.
So it was kind of like developmental pediatrics before there was developmental pediatrics.
Right.
And what she was doing.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I think about that, but I didn't really, for me, I didn't tie everything together that she was actually the one that noticed that I wasn't hitting those milestones. So, I talked about it on the channel before. You need an ally. You need allies in every aspect, in school, in healthcare for your kids, and they can be in the strangest places, but allies are important to advocate for your kids when you can. But, whether that be the school bus driver or whoever, allies are important. In this case, Mrs. Harrell was my ally and Mom's ally in helping establish the fact that I wasn't hitting those milestones and that I needed help. So let's see. So we just talked about me starting PT and how I did that. In the doctor's note I had, it said 8 months, but you said I started PT way before then, before 8 months. But I wasn't sitting up and crawling until 12 months, according to the doctor's note.
You set up before you started to do other things. Setting up is the first thing, other than trying to crawl. When you tried to crawl, you didn't put your knees up to crawl. You were sort of trying to pull yourself a little bit. You put your arms up. I've got a picture of you saw a few days ago where you were like on your arms like this, and that was trying to crawl is what that was. And so the sitting up and all that was much later than it should have been. I believe you might have set up around probably 11 months or something like that. You learn to sit up without falling over.
The way I understand it too is that once I hit that 12-month period, and I started getting on the right track physically, that from that point on I developed normally as far as walking and everything else.
Yeah.
It's just that first 8 months or so I was really delayed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in between that, you had some problems that were not connected with the hypospadias, like you had feeding. You were allergic to milk.
Right.
You were allergic to all kinds of, I had to take you off all your food.
Now those issues, the kids, the protocol is that they get a nasal gastric tube. All kids with prader-willi, and any kid that has failure to thrive, as far as I understand, that has feeding problems, gets a nasal gastric tube, so that they can more likely tolerate those things that may not be easily tolerated. And that, but that, again, in 78, that wasn't the protocol for failure to thrive. So you had to go through that elimination diet with me and try to get to the right food.
Right. Well, back then, I find it interesting you're talking about you need an ally, or what was it you called it?
An ally, yeah.
Is that back then in 1978, there wasn't the support.
Right, because, again, the rate 1 in 15,000 with prader-willi, there's just not that many people as there are now.
And people did not think about medical care as much years ago of the mental issue about it. You need an ally for the emotional and mental stress, parents especially.
Yeah.
Because you don't have time when you've got a child with a problem, you're all zoned in on them and you forget totally about yourself and what it's doing to you. You're trying to help that child survive. Because, as we all know, parents have that unconditional love and you're centered on that child. You forget about yourself and what you're going through. Nobody ever, that's the bad thing, is that my mother apologized to me one time because she said she did not think about what I was going through. And so you're lost in the shuffle because everybody around you, their attention is on the child. and there's no support there for the person, the caregiver.
Yeah.
And other people, like your grandparents, are as heartbroken as the parents are when these things happen. So you got 4 people that are upset, all of them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, an ally it just perked my ears when you were sitting there saying that, because, even as you got older, I didn't have many allies, or support system.
Well, I thought it was really cool. Like Dr. Schutte being our greatest ally.
Definitely.
And how important that was. And there were teachers. Miss Patterson was an ally. And the IEP teacher, when I was in kindergarten, that kept me in her class for 2 years, she was an ally. So it's just, you think, as a community for prader-willi syndrome, we can be each other's allies. Mm-hmm. And that's part of what this is I want people that feel disconnected from the world with prader-willi syndrome, because you may be in a country that doesn't have the infrastructure or the care, standard of care, that you have allies, and that, you might go to Instagram or on YouTube and find some allies. But that's a big mission here, is to make the world seem smaller for a diagnosis that can be so big for people.
And you can find allies where you least expect it sometimes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's so many good people out there that once they understand and learn about prader-willi, and it is unusual, so it does make people stop and think, because it is unusual. That you find allies. My friends that I worked with at work became allies, because they always were so kind to you, and were thinking about when they would come to visit and we were going to have something to eat, they would bring you sugar-free popsicles or something for Jared, that he could eat. They would do that, and I never asked them to do that. They would do that. So you find allies if you look for them in a lot of people. So, and there's a lot of people that are willing to listen if you're willing to share and talk to them.
Yeah. So this last question, and I'm gonna have to actually charge the phone. When did you notice and we're about halfway through these questions, when did you notice that I was having an issue with hyperphagia, that insatiable hunger?
Well, first off, the doctors that weren't your primary doctor, like your urologist, and the doctors you worked with, like with your ear, you had an ear, nose, and throat specialist. Some of them could be very rude,
right? And
they would treat me like I was force feeding you because you were so heavy, and I thought, I'm not. How can I force feed a child?
Right.
At this point, you're like 2.5, 3 years old.
And it's cruel in the fact that you have that period of where you're not eating to where you are eating everything.
Yeah.
And it seems like you feel good because I'm sure the child is eating, that you don't know what that next step is. That the child's going to eat more than it should.
I mean, prader-willi had never been heard of.
Right.
I'd never heard the term.
Yeah.
I didn't even know. You were heavy. But think about this. The people in your father's family were all heavy.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah.
His siblings were a little on the heavy side.
Yeah.
And some of them were pretty heavy. But, so I just thought, well, it's a gene. Your own cousin was as big as you were, almost. He didn't have prader-willi.
Right.
So, I was so young and everything, you already had the other health problems that I was facing. In my mind, when we found out you were hypospadias, that was a big enough problem. We were having a lot of problems with that. And to go forward and find out that you had prader-willi, and so the prader-willi and the hypospadias were still kept separate. Because back then, I'm not so sure they even discussed that then, or had discovered yet that was a part of prader-willi.
Yeah.
So you were treated as if you were born with two birth defects.
Interesting.
So that's the way I felt. You had two birth defects.
Yeah.
You had hypospadias, fourth degree.
And that just goes to show the growth in like pathology during when it was like, you know, people have all these little related conditions that they can't see are related because that condition hasn't been fully fleshed out yet, and actually what the criteria for that condition are. So to know that the hypogonadism and the hypospadias and all those developmental things were related to prader-willi wasn't really. I know it was talked about the hypogonadism and things like that was related to prader-willi, but that there wasn't a direct correlation because again, nobody in Asheville knew the pathology of prader-willi.
Also, in the 70s, think about this, that was a different world back then. Even morally, could be. People did things a different way. It was a different time. So, being hypospadias was a delicate issue.
Yeah.
That a lot of people didn't talk about or discuss. And in today's world, there's no problem with that. But back then, because it was another rare type thing, it wasn't rare. Hypospadias wasn't as rare, but to be that badly affected as you were was rare.
Yeah.
They'd never seen anybody that bad, is what they told me. That's why fourth degree. So it wasn't that it was, because it could be something very minor to be classified as hypospadias.
Yeah.
So, but yours was very severe.
Yeah.
So they had to handle things. It's almost like they didn't know how to handle it. Even with me, they had to handle it with kid gloves. So.
All right, we're still filming.
How am I doing?
Good, great. Very good, awesome. It's going to be great. Really excited. So the hyperphagia, though, as far as eating, you said that there was a lot of judgment from other doctors and things about the assumption that you were overfeeding me.
It was my fault. You were so heavy.
Actually. And once I was walking, was I searching for food constantly, or
it wasn't that you, like if you were sitting at the table, and my mother was a feeder. You know that.
Yeah.
She loved to cook. She loved to feed people. Fat babies were so cute.
Right.
And then they are now. You can look at little fat babies. That's the only human that is considered cute when they're fat. So, should remarks from it, oh, it looks like he's got rubber bands tied around his arm, things like that.
Yeah.
So then as you were heavy at a year old. And so your baby book, I thought you weighed 40, but you weighed 30. At a year old, you weighed 30 pounds, which is a lot for a year old. And so you were having physical therapy, and you were overweight, and I thought maybe because you didn't move like other people, maybe you put weight on faster because you had that, not enough.
The hypotonia and things like that. Yeah.
So I guess too, it was hard for me to think there was something else wrong with you when I was dealing with so much to start with.
I got you.
You know, so people could be very rude. And I'll tell you this, and it's probably worse in today's society because I think people were probably not as nice today as they were back then, but there were instances when parents or strangers made ugly remarks to me.
Yeah.
About
what you were doing and what not.
About you.
Yeah.
Like we were standing in a restaurant waiting to get in. There was a waiting line, and you were not diagnosed yet, so you probably were somewhere between the age of 2 and 3 at your heaviest, probably before then. And there was these 2 real classy women in line in front of us, and they could tell they were just thinking they were superior. And one of them looks at the other one, and I'll never forget this and how painful it was for me. It was just so painful. One of them looked at the other one and looked at you and looked up at me like I was less than. And she looked over at the other one. Now they're standing right in front of us. That's ridiculous. You know, looking at you. And I wasn't the same person then as I was now. I learned to be a fighter and you know, for the right thing for you, and I had to fight doctors and their opinions and their test results. So I learned to be a little tougher person, but at that point, it broke my heart. It just hurt me so bad, and at the same time, I wanted to whip those women.
Right.
You know, because I was so angry. But there was some painful things, and then I had your Dr. Maitland say that to me, you know, what he said to me after surgery, made a snide remark about your weight, which was so unprofessional anyway. So, and the funny thing that got me about this doctor who said that, once I found out you had prader-willi and you went to half the size you were, because I got you on a diet and all this, when I took you in, he never acknowledged the weight loss. Never said a word about it. After the ugly thing he said to me about the weight gain, and I looked at him, and I was just really aggravated when he didn't say anything. So I looked at him and I said, and for your information, Jared has prader-willi syndrome, look at that. And we left.
Yeah.
So, you know, but that, when you're a mother, you're going to fight for your child.
I think that's one thing that's kind of good now, because there are so many people born with so many different afflictions and things. And, I mean, they were there before, but genetically, there's more people in the group of diagnosed people. And we see that with autism, we see that with Down syndrome, we see it with a lot. People would never think that way now, to where it's any condition or any difference is the mother's fault or anything like that. They might think it for a split second, but because of the way the world is now, you know, we've all these other diagnoses and all these other developmental problems are more in the forefront. So, and I think that's a great thing for prader-willi awareness, because I think that the parents all, you know, we all go through that. They all go through that cycle of the failure to thrive, and then the pickup of the hyperphagia, and you know, that might not be even a major symptom for someone having prader-willi anymore, from what I understand and what I've learned. In the conference, that hyperphagia may not take in the same way, but it's just really good to know that as awareness for prader-willi comes about, that when we see these kids that are under the age of 5 that go through these weight gains, that we can kind of say, you know, that maybe prader-willi will be talked more about in a common way than it is. You know, that people will be like, that's a prader-willi child, I don't want to say that a stereotype will arise and that'll make everything perfect, but I think awareness of people and awareness of these conditions is a great thing. And it's just amazing how things have changed between the late 70s and now, and how we look at developmental conditions like that, like Down syndrome, like prader-willi, like things that kids face.
Well, this is the other thing, is that with you and some prader-willi people, that birth defect is invisible.
Yeah.
People don't know that you have that.
Yeah.
That can be a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing in a way. I mean, but it's something I was always sort of thankful for, that they didn't look at you and have any kind of thought process about it, because it wasn't that noticeable on you. And we talked about that growing up. I think I told you one time that this girl, her leg, we were in an office and she was missing a leg, and I looked at you and we'd been upset about something that day. I think we were in Charleston, and I told you, I said, you can see her birth defect, you can't see yours. And that's a good thing, So the thing about it with parents of prader-willi is that you can always find good things about something. And with me, one of the rewards of being a prader-willi parent, or a parent of any child that could be developmentally delayed or have problems, is that I would have those days. The first step you took, I cried. Everything that you did that they said that you couldn't do was a milestone. Everything that you did or accomplished, my happy factor went way, way up. I appreciated everything that you accomplished, and it would be things that other kids do, and nobody would even note it as an accomplishment. But with a prader-willi child, when you start going above what the doctors said you were going to do, or you accomplish the first steps of walking, or anything you've overcome, and in yours, it was just everything, like, the strides of starting school, losing weight, getting into your music, ended up being the drum major. All those were like my pride and joy moments of watching that. The first time you walked out on a college football field, it was like the emotion of happiness I felt the first time you walked out at Western Carolina on that field. And I thought, it was like my whole past from the day you were born up to that point just came flooding into me. And I was so, if pride could have been a measure, you couldn't even have seen how much pride that I had. I was just the happiness that I felt. And other people, and you know what? I feel like that I'm so lucky to have that, because other people that have children that don't have problems reaching their goals, they don't know how that type of happiness. And I do, So I'm thinking, when I would have that feeling, I think other parents should all feel this way.
It's almost like, and this is the way I think about it, it's almost like the spirit is bigger than the person. And that if the spirit wants to do something, then the person's going to do it, no matter what condition they're in.
Yeah. I believe that, and I believe that it is so important for prader-willi kids, especially with all, it's like, and I know that parents probably just think it's just going to be one uphill battle after another. Yeah, there's some uphill battles, but the top of the hill is wonderful, because it's going to be like the ups and the downs, but the downs might seem low, but boy, when you hit those highs, they are wonderful and they are encouraging.
Yeah.
And everybody, no matter how bad I feel like the child could be, you're going to have those ups and downs. And there is a special bond that you have with a child with problems that is a great bond.
Time and time again, from the kids that I met at the convention or that I've seen online, the parents or just the kids seem so much more in spirit and happiness and aura and energy than what prader-willi is. I never have met a kid, deletion, UPD, any other form of prader-willi, that really fit the diagnosis themselves. It's always that their spirit and their energy and their happiness was so much bigger and so much superseded any of the diagnosis.
Yeah, there's something, and I can't even put my finger on it. Kids that are born like that with problems,
Mm-hmm.
there's something that happens to those children, and I believe it's God's blessing on them.
Mm-hmm.
That there is a peaceful, quiet, this spirit in those kids that you don't see in every child.
Yeah.
And the other thing I've noticed, and I know maybe other people have noticed this, usually if a kid is, or born with a lot of problems or something, it's almost like they're gifted at something.
Yeah.
Totally. Like you've heard the term savant.
They've actually said that about Prader-Willi syndrome, that we have visual spatial acuity that's high.
Mm-hmm.
That the way that we can figure out visual things and the way things fit together, and art, things like that, that it's our propensities are really high there.
Yeah.
So I tell people, I met a person that was really big into woodworking. I said, get your child into that woodworking with you because they're going to love it.
Yeah.
Because it's just a visual acuity thing. They talk about, you've heard it too, about jigsaw puzzles that Prader-Willi kids, yes, but there's other visual things, that they may take up to. I don't have the patience for jigsaw puzzles, but I love art, I love drawing and all that, and I think part of that's the Prader-Willi.
Mm-hmm.
But we better take a break because